Bill Gates has been warning us about a pandemic for years.
Countries. And a large epidemic would require us to have hundreds of thousands of workers.
He and Dr. Fauci have been working together for years.
Beautiful sunny morning.
Indeed it is.
Now, you bring good news to the...
As I've repeatedly showed in many of my videos, Dr. Fauci paid that lab in Wuhan, China, $3.7 million.
The U.S. may have sent almost $4 million to the lab in Wuhan in order to have them research coronavirus in bats. That's right. And Dr. Anthony Fauci, the head of NIH and part of the National Institutes of Health, may have actually been the one sending the money to that lab in Wuhan.
Then in October of last year, all these same operatives ran a curious exercise.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months.
During this exercise, they outlined the exact scenario that we're living in today. Then in January of 2020, a coronavirus, almost exactly as the one defined in the exercise, was suddenly appeared in Wuhan, China.
Wuhan, China, a sprawling city of 11 million people. It was here that coronavirus...
At the time, Anthony Fauci, who again funded the lab where this was most likely developed, wasn't too worried about things.
We're getting many, many more tests out there so that the health departments and even individual hospitals can be able to test much more easily, with the results getting back much more quickly.
He was on all the news channels, proclaiming he wasn't really sure what was going to happen.
Situation in which we really don't know what is going to happen. In other words, how much it's going to accelerate. It's been accelerating.
And then very suddenly, in March, it was definitely a pandemic, and we needed to change our entire way of life.
Welcome to another MedCram COVID-19 update. And as you can see, this is now become a pandemic. And this is validated with the numbers that are coming outside of China. If we go to the Worldometer site, you can see clearly we're in the acceleration phase here.
Then suddenly, one by one, the states started issuing lockdown orders, completely restricting travel, even the right to leave your own home. All kinds of crazy, unconstitutional, and highly illegal actions were taken by local governors in states across the country and indeed across the entire world.
In breaking news, California has been placed into lockdown, putting around 40 million people into isolation. And we will bring you more details.
Suddenly, the global corporate media started saying the same talking points everywhere at the same time. It was time to flatten the curve.
Here is a very instructive, which I'll put a link to in the description below. And it has to do with this notion of flattening the curve. And that's what I want to talk about today. So here's the curve. If you have everybody congregating together, of course, the virus is going to move fairly quickly, it is thought. And if you don't have protective measures, that transmission is going to be very rapid. But then just as quickly, because you have burned a large swath in the population of people, there's going to be immunity that is built very quickly in the survivors. And then the curve is going to flatten out quickly as well.
Everybody, the world over, believed this, that we needed to flatten the curve in order to stop this pandemic somehow. Did we have any data to back this up? No. Were the numbers coming out of China reliable? No. Had anybody even done any testing on this virus, really? Not really. Suddenly, global markets were crashing.
Welcome back. Last week has been a roller coaster on Wall Street, to say the least, with the stock market seeing some of the worst days since the 1980s. This as investors...
Businesses the world over were closed, shuttered, employees sent home. Unemployment claims spiked up to 10 to 20 million unemployment claims in mere months. Restaurants were closed. Bars were closed. Nearly all small family-owned businesses were closed. But giant corporate stores were left open and given new guidelines about social distancing and how many people they were allowed in the stores, etc. Panic set in. People were buying toilet paper, food, guns, anything they could get in ahead of this horrendous pandemic that was affecting everybody and their lives and the economy.
There are calls for calm tonight, both from police and our nation's leaders, after a violent confrontation in a supermarket sparked by panic over the coronavirus.
People the world over were staying home and watching Netflix and doing everything they could to be good little citizens and help flatten the curve. All of us completely sure that the hospitals were just being overrun with all these coronavirus victims. But then videos began to emerge of a very different story.
Phyllis and William Mack Pavilion here on 7th Avenue in Manhattan. And usually on a Saturday at this time, this is pretty busy. But as you can see, there's not much going on. In fact, there's not much going on at the Phyllis and William Mack Pavilion either. Emergency. Oh, the dog needs to drop one. So that's not an emergency, but I guess this is a good spot for it.
There was video taken at hospitals all over California, showing empty waiting rooms and almost nobody there. Almost as if the panic had been completely manufactured by corporate media. More and more Americans were beginning to question the flatten the curve narrative and exactly how deadly this virus really is. The entire world has gone nuts. Everybody's walking around wearing these masks. Nobody's allowed to go outside. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't run your business. People are protesting. People are fighting in the streets. People are fighting doctors. Doctors are fighting veterans. This is getting absolutely crazy. And for what? What are the doctors actually working with this situation telling us?
As we have people coming in 7 in the morning till midnight, we're reporting to the health department, we're calling patients back, and at the same time, our volumes have dropped significantly. The hospitals, their ICUs are empty, essentially, and they're shutting down floors, they're furloughing patients, they're furloughing doctors. So the health system has been evacuated in certain places. So we did that initially. And over the last couple months, we've gained a lot of data. Typically in Kern County, for instance, we've tested 5,213 people, and we have 340 positive COVID cases. Well, that's 6.5% of the population. That means you have a 0.03 chance of dying from COVID-19 in the state of California.
0.03% chance. That's significantly lower than the 0.1% chance that you could die of the seasonal flu every year. And now doctors and nurses all over the world are reporting that they're being pressured to claim all kinds of illnesses are in fact COVID because the COVID deaths are not equaling the original projections from the World Health Organization, the CDC, Dr. Fauci, and of course, everybody's favorite, Billy Boy Gates.
But ER doctors now, my friends that I talk to say, it's interesting, when I'm writing up my death report, I'm being pressured to add COVID.
Just look at the difference in these numbers, okay? In 2019, all of these people here died of heart disease, cancer, accidents, strokes, Alzheimer's, flu, homicide, etc. Now in 2020, most of those deaths are being reported as COVID, and only a tiny fraction of the deaths are being reported as heart disease, cancer, accidents, stroke, Alzheimer's. It's a miracle, folks. We've cured cancer. Here in Hawaii, 16 people have died of COVID. That's in a population of 1.4 million. So you've got less than a 1 in a million chance, roughly 1 in a million chance of dying of COVID here in Hawaii. Now, I happen to know that most of those deaths were people over 65 who already had a severe or serious illness. Do you think maybe that's why they're trying so hard to inflate the COVID numbers by pretending that pneumonia, cancer, and all of these other diseases just suddenly cease to exist? And what's the agenda? Why? Why are we still in a lockdown? It's pretty clear the curve has been flattened. All the hospitals are empty. And yet still, we can't go back to work. We can't go to the beach. We can't have parties. We can't go to restaurants or bars. The economy is cratering. Millions and millions of people are out of work. And all that lost business is now getting to the farmers.
As farmers are struggling to survive during the outbreak.
Closed restaurants and businesses mean nearby farmers aren't selling their crops. James Gilbert went to a farm in Hamlin and watched as a farmer destroyed his livelihood.
And it's not just onions. Farmers are slaughtering all their cows, their pigs, destroying all their crops, ostensibly because they can't bring them to market. But what do you think is going to happen when the farmers are destroying all the food? What's going to happen to the price of food? And with the government handing out so much money to so many people, what do you think is going to happen to the value of the dollar? We are headed for a very, very real catastrophe, as the dollar continues to plummet in value, and food will suddenly become exorbitantly expensive as there will be such a scarcity of it. People are going to start to go hungry, and hungry people tend to get violent. Meanwhile, all over the world, people are starting to protest these lockdowns. They understand that nobody's dying. They understand that this lockdown is BS and it's just going to destroy their livelihoods.
You cannot do this to people.
How many people own the news companies?
How many?
Well, you tell me.
Three or four.
How many does Disney own?
How many?
How many?
I don't know.
And the coverage of these protests has been abysmal. A completely one-sided narrative painting the protesters as greedy, selfish extremists, never mentioning the egregious infringements on our basic inalienable human rights that is being performed globally by almost every government, illegally. And all of this is being censored heavily on Twitter, Facebook, all the social media companies. Because once private corporations own all the social media networks, you don't have freedom of speech anymore. And now they're using that lack of freedom of speech to shape the narrative. The narrative is, unless you do exactly what the fascists want, you are a greedy, selfish person who wants everybody else to die of some disease that's absolutely horrific. Even though we know it's barely worse than the flu, if it's even as bad as the flu. So what are you going to do? You're going to stay home? You're going to wear a mask? You're going to not open your small family-owned business? You're going to continue to shop at Walmart and Amazon and all these giant corporations who have gotten billions from the government already during this whole fiasco? What are you going to do? Because if we continue to let them trample our inalienable rights, we're headed for an absolute catastrophe. A catastrophe of hyperinflation, starvation, and absolute slavery and poverty for everybody in the world. Except for maybe this guy and a few of his buddies.